He leads roughly 1,000 lawyers, nearly 300 investigators, and about 800 support staff employees. She's the first woman and first African American to serve as LA County District Attorney since the office was established in 1850. She led the creation of several alternative sentencing courts to deal with specific nonviolent offenders: the LA County Veterans Court, the LA County Women's Reentry Court, and the LA County Co-occurring Disorders Court. She has also taken a leadership role in the formation of LA County's Criminal Justice Mental Health Project. In 2011, she was named Chief Deputy DA and was responsible for overseeing day-to-day operations at the office. She's received many honors. In 2013, District Attorney Lacey was named to the Power 100 by Ebony magazine. She was also chosen recently to receive a prize in welcoming District Attorney Jackie Lacey.
Well, good afternoon, Plato Society members and guests. Thank you for this opportunity. Are any of you familiar with TED Talks? All right. I discovered TED Talks a year ago, and I love them. And when I started out with this special project that I will talk to you about, I decided I would deliver my message in TED Talk format. It is my dream one day to be invited to give a TED Talk. And so if you haven't discovered TED Talks, please go to TED.com. I am a career prosecutor and an avid people watcher. For nearly 30 years, I have watched in frustration as the same people go in and out of jail and prison, and we confront the same issues over and over again. Some days I feel like I am living in the criminal justice version of the movie Groundhog Day. In the movie, the character played by Bill Murray wakes up every day to find the same date on the calendar. He faces the same people with the same problems. He is caught in a time loop. In the criminal justice system, it sometimes feels that way. In Los Angeles County, prosecutors encounter a daily barrage of low-level and nonviolent offenders. We often feel like we are reading the same set of circumstances and the same crime charging sheets, and we respond the same way. We request some form of punishment. Usually, it's incarceration. Sadly, the long-term outcome also remains the same. 64% of the people that we incarcerate return for a new crime or a technical violation within 3 years of being released. The highest percentage will return in the first 6 months. California has one of the highest recidivism rates in the nation. We can do better. One way we can do better is to divert some of these lower-level offenders from the criminal justice system. Offering nonviolent offenders a chance to change their lives and avoid incarceration has proven successful. It reduces local recidivism rate, saving taxpayer dollars, and reserving the precious jail beds for the more dangerous offenders. We protect the public safety by stopping low-level offenders before they commit other more serious crimes. Now, as a prosecutor, it is my duty to seek justice, and that means determining what is right and doing it. So in 2009, I was the assistant district attorney responsible for what's called the office's branch and area, when an interesting opportunity arose. One of my directors, Janet Moore, stopped by my office to discuss an idea that was floating around the courthouse. A group of justice partners wanted to establish a pilot program for women reentering the community after prison. The group was led by the public defenders, and it was comprised of a judge, probation officials, and 2 community partners. Public Counsel, who you may have heard of, the nation's largest nonprofit law firm, and Prototypes, a group dedicated to rebuilding the lives of women, children, and communities impacted by substance abuse, mental illness, and domestic violence. They wanted women who violated the terms of their parole to be housed in a residential facility instead of returning them back to prison. In that setting, they would receive counseling, food, shelter, and medical care. And if the women had minor children, they would live in these settings with their kids and receive parenting support. But they needed our cooperation. The prosecutor's office had to agree to it. Now, my first reaction was motivated by fear. I was worried that our office and the elected DA at the time, who was Steve Cooley, would be criticized for being soft on crime. I was troubled by the fear of what might happen if just one of these women got loose and hurt someone. Later, I realized that these fears exaggerated the risk. Of course, my top priority as a prosecutor is public safety. But historically, the chances of a woman reoffending by committing a violent crime were rather low. Janet and I reasoned that giving these women a second chance just might work. But we had to give them conditions that leveraged their relationships with their children and their families. More importantly, we had to make them accountable to a judge who had the power to incarcerate them if they violated any of the terms of their release. So we took a chance and changed our standard response as prosecutors. Rather than reacting as advocates, we became collaborators with our justice partners. The Second Chance Women's Reentry Court was created. The women who participated turned their lives around in astounding numbers. Their recidivism rate was just 20%. The County of Los Angeles gave the Justice Partners an award because the program saved about $10 million in its first 3 years. Thank you. Yes, at first we were skeptical. You can imagine how surprised we were to learn that, in fact, we could do better in the justice system. But in hindsight, we should have predicted the program's success. Drug courts, the first widely accepted alternative sentencing courts, have been saving lives for nearly 20 years. Both programs share 2 key components: a strong relationship between the judge and the defendant, and a viable support network. Defendants know that the person in the black robe is helping them, but can also put them in jail. That has motivated many defendants to get their lives together. And we are fortunate in LA County. We have devoted judges who understand the importance of this concept. But could this experiment work for a riskier population? Just 2 years later, we would find out. In 2010, the same group met to evaluate the criminal justice system's response to returning veterans. By then, our nation had been at war for nearly a decade, and some of these men and women were drug and alcohol addicted. They were committing the same types of crimes that accompany the lifestyle of an addict, with one disturbing difference. Most of these veterans had led law-abiding lives before they entered the military. A few short years ago, they were good kids, but they came back out of combat as troubled adults. The group that started the Second Chance Women's Reentry Court visited the Veterans Court down in Orange County, led by Judge Wendy Lindley. The same principles we use to help women, a new environment, support, and peer relationships, were helping vets. And we knew this alternative came with greater risk. Combat vets are trained to handle firearms, and we had no guarantees. We knew that if one of these vets, one of our vets, were released from the program, someone could get hurt. They could walk out at any time. On the other hand, we felt we owed this group, who had sacrificed so much for our freedom. We knew that locking them away in state prison might solve the problem for the immediate future, but just maybe we could do better. So in September of 2011, the Los Angeles County Veterans Court was launched in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. A nonprofit group called New Directions helped us. Since then, we have diverted many veterans who were headed for trouble for relatively minor offenses. They were taken to a safe and secure voluntary residential program on the VA campus in Westwood. Veterans there receive medical and mental health services paid for with their VA benefits. And the veterans were mentored by other veterans who have had combat experience. They also reported regularly to a judge who held them accountable. The vast majority have successfully completed the 18th-month program, and their recidivism rate, too, also dropped to about 20%. Some earned a dismissal of the charges, but more importantly, what we saw in their eyes is that many got their dignity back. At one graduation ceremony, a speaker borrowed a line from the MasterCard commercial. She said the program's cost savings to the county was $10 million. The value of seeing these military lives restored, priceless. Alternative sentencing is proven to work for nonviolent women and for veterans. But can these same concepts work with the criminal justice system's most problematic population? Those jailed for behavior caused by mental illness. There are roughly 18,000 people in the county jail, and approximately 17% of them have been diagnosed as suffering from some form of mental illness. For many, there is a strong link between their untreated mental illness and the acts that lead to their arrest. They can range anywhere from indecent exposure to homicide. The Los Angeles County Jail employs 38 full-time psychiatrists. That is more than Harvard UCLA Medical Center. There are 300 full-time employees that work in the jail's psych ward. And a psych bed costs 3 times more than a regular jail bed to maintain. Now, to complicate matters, this is one of the riskiest populations of people. According to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, those who are mentally ill return to prison at higher rates than most other inmates, particularly if they do not have access to mental health services when they leave prison. So under these circumstances, our justice partners have begun to wonder, can we do better? To answer that question, I would like to share with you the case of Miriam, a 28-year-old recent graduate of a local university. Miriam had never been in trouble in her life, and in hindsight, her mother would later tell me she knew something was wrong, but like a lot of parents, she thought her daughter was under stress from work and school. Miriam, who is from Tennessee, was calling her mother on a regular basis, asking to come home. Miriam felt that someone was after her. She would go several nights in a row without sleep. She felt that the demons were after her. Neighbors said they heard Miriam arguing loudly with others in her apartment. They didn't realize that Miriam lived alone. Neighbors complained to the apartment management. One day, Miriam ran into the hallway of her apartment. She was banging on her neighbor's apartment doors, and she was holding a knife. She was uttering threats to the neighbors. She was threatening to kill herself. A security guard who worked in the apartment yelled at her, and she slapped him. The police were called. Miriam was taken to a local county hospital, and she was held for a few days and medicated. For the first time in her life, Miriam was diagnosed as having a serious mental illness. Like so many others, Miriam was stabilized and then released, to no one in particular. She was not charged with a crime. A few days later, as the effects of the medication wore off, she began to feel that someone was after her again. And this time, she ran out of her apartment building and into a nearby driveway. Miriam jumped into the driver's seat of a car that still had a key in the ignition. The man who owned the car was opening a gate at a business parking lot when he saw someone in his car. She drove the car a few feet. He ran over and struggled with Miriam for the keys. He eventually got the keys out of the ignition and stopped the car. Miriam uttered an unintelligible phrase. She said, "Please give me a piece of my mind." Eventually, Miriam ran away, leaving her identification in the man's car in her purse. She was arrested a day or two later in her apartment. When presented with the police report, the prosecutors from my office charged Miriam with carjacking. Carjacking is a felony. It is defined by law as the taking of a motor vehicle in the possession of another from his or her person or immediate presence against his or her will, and accomplished by means of force and fear. In California, carjacking carries a mandatory sentence of 3, 5, or 9 years in the state prison. Probation is not even an option if you are charged with carjacking. The prosecutor assigned to the case reasoned that the struggle over the car keys met the standard of proof that the car had been taken by force or fear. Miriam's mother traveled to Los Angeles and humbly asked prosecutors to release her daughter so she could get her medical help. At the time, I managed the group of attorneys who filed the case. And I remember the day that Miriam's mom looked me in the eyes. She said her daughter would never have done this if she had been in her right mind. Now, I lost track of Miriam's case until recently. I wanted to find out what happened to Miriam. I was pleased that she had sought the care of a psychiatrist and that she had cooperated with doctors and not committed any new offenses. In cases like these, we as prosecutors face very difficult decisions. We could let Miriam go on a lesser charge, knowing that someday she could stop taking her medications and hurt someone. Or we can charge her with a crime and use the felony probation system to make her cooperate with her doctors and take her medication. My office chose the latter. A year after the incident, we insisted that Miriam plead guilty to the felony of taking a car, not carjacking. Miriam is on probation and has been ordered to cooperate with her doctors and take her medication. We wanted assurances that she would remain in treatment. But let's think for a moment about the choices we left for Miriam. She is out in the world, undoubtedly looking to start her career. She is very bright, with degrees from some of the top universities in the country. But now she is saddled with a dilemma. How does she explain this one episode in her life? Her felony conviction will easily be detected in any background investigation. How does she explain this incident to a potential employer, especially in this tough job market? Does she let them believe that she is a car thief? Or does she tell them the truth, that she has mental illness? Either answer will make it difficult for her to earn a living. Despite her felony conviction, Miriam is actually one of the fortunate ones in the criminal justice system. She has health insurance and health care. She trusts a family member who can help make her decisions about her treatment when she is decompensating. She has accepted that she is mentally ill and responsibly takes her medications for now. Many people in the criminal justice system are chronically in crisis due to mental illness, homelessness, and in some cases, substance abuse. I worry that this 30-year-old could get discouraged and become one of them. I worry that she could end up behind bars, or worse, that she could hurt herself or someone else. Creating alternatives to incarceration for those with mental illness will require us to take a greater risk than we did with women. And it certainly doesn't have the political appeal that surrounded our decision to establish a Veterans Court. In many circumstances, those afflicted with mental illness are stigmatized, and they're actually blamed for their condition. This is wrong. A person whose disorder or disease affects the mind is no more responsible for his or her condition than someone who gets cancer. Perhaps the question we should be asking ourselves is not can we do better? Instead, we should be telling ourselves, we must do better. We have an incredible opportunity. I lead a large working group of more than 60 people that are exploring a variety of ways to address this issue. We believe that we can intercept people at various stages of the criminal justice process and divert them into a more effective program to help them get well. I want to talk to you just a bit about what the Criminal Justice Mental Health Project is doing and give you a report on what we're doing. The Criminal Justice Project has been meeting regularly, and we held the first of its kind summit. It is comprised of people who normally don't even shake hands. We have law enforcement, we have the ACLU, we have the National Association of the Mentally Ill, we have prosecutors and public defenders, we have the CEO of the county departments, we have the representatives from each of the Board of Supervisors. And we are committed to continue to hang in there until we figure this out, how we can do better. So far, in 1 year's time, we've had a pretty good success rate. Just last November, the Board of Supervisors agreed to give us $20 million initially to explore alternatives for those who are mentally ill. They also have given money to the Department of Mental Health to create crisis centers so that in the future, when the Merriams of the world are arrested for something that does not involve a weapon, that they can be taken there and stabilized rather than the county jail. No one gets well in the county jail. And our plan is to have those crisis centers up and running by the end of the year. We also realize that law enforcement has become the first-line responder to those who are mentally ill. And often many of them aren't trained on how to de-escalate a situation when someone is in mental health or mental illness and in crisis. So we've traveled to, of all places, Memphis, Tennessee, where I hate to say it, they're a bit more progressive than we are here in the Los Angeles County. And they have these officers who are part of a crisis intervention team, so that when you call dispatch and you want help with a loved one who is spinning out of control due to mental illness, they will send out a team of specially trained officers who have a clinician with them. And they have their marching orders, and they have access to the history of the person that they're responding to. And they're quite successful in de-escalating these situations and getting these people the help that they need. They are so successful, and they've been in operation now for 15 years in Memphis. They've been doing this way. They're actually able to shut down a wing of their jail. It is no longer necessary. We've also been down to Miami-Dade, Florida, where they have been instituting diversion programs down there for about 10 years. And there is a judge down there who started it by the name of Steve Leifman. And he has become my mentor and the mentor for the group in terms of advising us how to do it. But the way we see it is our top priorities are as follows: looking for alternative places for people to get treatment and for people to live once they do determine that they're mentally ill, and to get supportive housing in place. Our second is creating law enforcement training so that officers who are out there responding understand what they're responding to. And our third is just getting a database so that we can all share information about various different people who are in our community who are suffering from mental illness, so that no officer and no mentally ill person ends up losing their lives. So we're very excited about this project. It is growing in terms of numbers and people who are very interested. But I hope that by talking to you, and this is why I appreciate this opportunity, that we have the support of the community. Because if we don't have your buy-in, the truth of the matter is one of these people is going to mess up. But we are convinced that many of the people that we're talking about, and I wanted to be clear about this, I'm not talking about the serial killer, but many of these people are in for very low-level offenses, and because they are mentally ill, they actually end up doing more time, because time is more time than those who are not mentally ill, because we're using the jail hospital to treat them and stabilize them. So that's my TED Talk for you today, and I want to thank you for listening to my talk. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for a very thoughtful presentation.
Thank you.
I'm actually going to ask the first question.
The power of holding the mic. I
Yes.
like that.
In some ways, mental illness seems to me to be a difficult thing to define, particularly when you're trying to work with it in this fashion. How do you think about how to define it, and how do you try to avoid the manipulation that someone might perhaps feign it in order to get different treatment?
I'm convinced that, first of all, I believe in the field of psychiatry, and I believe that, and psychology, and I believe that the criminal justice system is equipped with enough expert to determine who's a malingerer, who's a phony, and who isn't. In the case of Miriam, I want you to think about this. Our office accepted the fact that this young woman was mentally ill. There's no question about it. She was diagnosed by jail psychiatrist, okay? So we know that, and we've seen her response to medication. So I think we have mechanisms in place to figure out who's pretending and who isn't. The issue is more of how to respond, because up until now, the prosecutor's offices, for the most part, the only thing we're trained to do is try to cross-examine a psychiatrist who normally comes in to a death penalty case in order to save someone's life. So there's very little experience that we've had and very little empowerment that we've had to do any other alternatives. What I would like to do, though, is to divert a number of people before we even file a case. And there'll be some where we have to file a case in order to keep them on felony probation. But it seems to me it's a waste of money and a waste of time to use a felony conviction and to use a probation officer to ensure that someone stays on their meds. And on top of that, when we saddle them with a felony, there are certain things, certain jobs, we're saying to them, recover from this, stay healthy, and get out there and work and support yourself. And yet, by that felony conviction, what we do is we disenfranchise them and make them a lot harder. It's already tough enough to be mentally ill and manage your illness, and now to layer on that, cutting off access just to housing and all these other things, it seems to me counterintuitive to public safety and common sense.
You listed...
Repeat the question, please.
Did your group of advisors include psychologists and psychiatrists?
Yes. I neglected to mention that we have partnered with a group of psychiatrists from both UCLA and USC. They are on our group, and we also have the representatives from the Hospital Association of, I can't remember whether it's California or Los Angeles. They're in there with us. So we have a number of people who are consulting, and they're extremely valuable to us in terms of providing us advice.
Yes. Thank you. You had mentioned recidivism and the issue of coming out of jail with a record. And I would like to hear your recommendations as to how we should deal with the records. I know some employment forms Now they're discussing whether or not to permit the question of have you served a jail term. What are your recommendations in general to help people who come out of jail with a record overcome that to get employment that they are restricted from by most employers due to the answer, yes, I've had a record?
Right. I'm not sure if it passed this year. There was a Ban the Box initiative that precluded certain employers from asking whether you had a felony conviction. The reason I do not support that wholesale is because there are certain jobs of trust where it's important to know a person's prior criminal history to understand the risk. So for instance, let's say you wanted to go into caretaking for the elderly. I think it would be important for the person who employs you to know whether you had an embezzlement record. I don't think you should be able to just wash that clean. I think it would be important if you're talking about a school teacher, someone who's applying to work around kids, to know whether they have ever been convicted of molesting children. And so there are certain jobs where the person that you're serving or the person that you're serving is vulnerable, or the information, even in my office, that you access is so sensitive. I think you need to know that record, and it may be that initiative or proposal takes that into account. But do I think that people who have served their time deserve a fresh start? I do. I do. I think if you've served your time, if you're indicating you're willing to be a law-abiding resident and you're willing to work, I believe in redemption, I've seen it, and I think many people deserve a fresh start.
Sorry. This may appear off topic. I don't think it is. Do you have a position, District Attorney, on decriminalizing marijuana?
Yes, I do. It's coming, right? It's coming in 2016. It's going to be on our ballot. And I've actually gone to Colorado this past summer to tour some of the marijuana stores, and they range anywhere from a 7-Eleven type setup to a Whole Foods type setup. And while I am not in the camp of arguing that marijuana is such a terrible evil, that we ought to ban it. For instance, I believe if you are sick and this is helpful to you, I support you having it. But I'm worried about the quality of life in the community and the city and the county that I love. Because the medical marijuana dispensaries have not the regulation on them has been difficult to enforce. And they show up at all kinds of places that they probably shouldn't be. Some of the dispensaries pass out flyers at the local high school. And so I cannot and will not support the legalization of marijuana until I'm sure that controls can be in place to protect the neighborhood, to protect the quality of life. And that's really where I stand on that.
There's a thing that you've left out of this. It involved the Thomas case, involved the Edson Ford case, and that is families, where police, when they see a mentally challenged person like Edson Ford and Thomas in Orange County, to not call the family first and to de-escalate the situation. It seems to me, in both cases, both men might have been alive if the police had been trained to call the family first and de-escalate the situation. Have you thought of that in the future? Because I will tell you, the way it looks now, the black community doesn't look at the family as a solution, and maybe putting these people into mental institutions or someplace else where they've been taken care of. Because families are sure not taking responsibility for their family members' actions.
I'm glad you brought this up. So as part of my working group, we have families. We have mothers and fathers of people who suffer, adults, because that's the most challenging population of adults who suffer from mental illness. The National Association of the Mentally Ill, in fact, represents families who are there to advocate on behalf of their loved ones. What I like about the family involvement in our group is they're realist. A lot of times, if you're a family member and you have someone who's mentally ill and in crisis, you're afraid. You're afraid to just leave them there. They are uttering things and they're threatening to you, and yet, you call the police and they want to know, well, is there a threat to life? Are they in danger themselves? And if you say that, then there's a different response, and then if that happens, they end up getting locked up in a facility, and it's kind of like you don't want that either. I support it, and I'm really glad. As a result of our mental health initiative, I believe that that's the reason this county this summer implemented Laura's Law. Because what I'd like to do, my ideal vision, is to get people help before they spin so far out of control that they become a police problem. So I want to figure out how we can get family members who do have an adult who is suffering from untreated mental illness to get them some help. So I support Laura's Law. It's a controversial law, but Laura's Law would allow family members to go into court and petition to get that person to take their medication if they are diagnosed with mental illness. And I really think that's the key. It's tough. You're asking, the reason I back off of police a little bit is because in a split second they're responding to something, they may not have time to call family. Things can get out of control so quickly. What I would love, though, is for law enforcement to have a database so that when they're running that person, they can see, oh, this person is schizophrenic, so we're going to, lower our voices, or whatever you need to do to de-escalate a situation when someone is mentally ill. I want that right at the ready on their computer so that they know, or this person has this medication. Not only have we included the families in discussion, because we need the families, but the LA County Jail now has a website. On their website, if you have a loved one who is in there who is mentally ill, you can fax in information on their medical history and their medication so that the jail psychiatrist can know which medication they're on instead of experimenting and trying to figure out what the right medication is. So not only are we including families, we need them. We absolutely need them. But I do think that with law enforcement, they're in a pickle. Being out there trying to figure out who is mentally ill and who is mentally ill and dangerous, and it's tough. And I think there needs to be a lot more training and certainly a lot more sensitivity, and I think we need to accept that mental illness is not the fault of the person who has it, and that there is a path or a way to get people to cooperate and get themselves some help.
Thanks so much for coming today. As a mental health professional, I can't tell you how much in support of this I am. And it's amazing that it's taken this long for somebody to say, oh my God, we have to do something different. My question is, how do you select from the pool of people who might be considered diagnostic categories that will help you succeed with this program so you can expand it even more to the less likely to be successful ones?
That's a $20 million question. What we've elected to do is to look at regions that are successful and copy them. And we figure, for instance, with Miami-Dade, Florida, their jurisdiction, with Memphis, as I mentioned, and with Behar County, which is San Antonio, they've already got it up and running. And then New York just started a month ago. So we're using their models to try to figure it out. It's so tough. So as soon as I started talking about this topic, the first thing that happened is I started getting business cards from companies, people who own companies who wanted to get a government contract to, I don't blame them, to help us solve this problem. And, in the county, they have a bidding process that's got to be fair and open and whatever. I know my limitations. I know I don't have that expertise. So we're modeling it after others, and we have a group of highly respected psychiatrists and mental health professionals who are part of our team who are helping us navigate that. Thank you. I can hear you. I don't know if it's on.
Okay. Hopefully it's on.
Yes.
This is a little broader than what you have been discussing, but there are, I guess, an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 homeless people in LA, many of whom are mentally ill, and not necessarily in the criminal justice system. Why can't we do anything to address this, all these people who clearly could use help, and some of whom are mentally ill?
So this is a good time to introduce the woman that I brought with me. Terry Cody, would you please stand up? Terry is an attorney, but she's also my liaison to the community. And just recently, I sent her to Washington, D.C., to a conference held there on homelessness and figuring out what we could do about the number of mentally ill people who are homeless. I think it takes a lot of work to convince people that living on the street, especially if you're mentally ill, is not a good option and not a good solution. I think the answer is going to be supportive housing. Housing that is right there, that is clean, where you have a doctor on site, where you have substance abuse on site, convince and finding the right place for folks who are homeless. But you'll have to invite Mayor Garcetti to speak, because Mayor Eric Garcetti, that's on his goal list to decrease homelessness in the city. It's challenging. It seems like it's better than what it used to be by virtue of the businesses, but I'm told people are just displaced and moved out. Hopefully, with our diversion project, if we can, we'll scoop up some of those people, because many of those people are, arrested for indecent exposure or street fights or whatever. And hopefully, when we have them in the criminal justice system, maybe we'll be able to get them stabilized enough so that when they are presented with an alternative of living in supportive housing, they'll choose that over going back out into the streets.
In our system, you have many convicted drug users, and of them, a lot of them are mentally ill and are there because they've been self-medicating. What, if anything, are we doing, or are they able to be part of some of these new programs, and so that they can get helped? And then my second question is, the first program that you talked about with the with the women, what was the age range approximately of those women?
Okay, so the first question was, are we considering substance abuse? Substance abuse and mental illness almost go hand in hand. We've discovered with the population, most of the people who are mentally ill are also using illegal substances, as you very eloquently said. We think the Affordable Care Act might be able to help us out in this area, because we think that the Affordable Care Act is going to help pay for people to get help with their substance abuse, and we'll be able to marry that with a mental health diversion program. We have on our working group, on our task force, members of public health and health services who administer those substance abuse programs, and so we are dealing with that. The second question, though, was, what was the second part of your question? Oh, ages. For women's reentry, it seemed like it was anywhere from 18 to about 35. There was no age restriction, but the facility that they run, many of the women have children, and it is really a beautiful setup for that. I mean, there are cribs, there are classes, they really cater to mothers, and, word gets out, and the next thing you know, people come. But 18 to 35 appeared to be the group that used the Women's Reentry Court the most.
I want to first thank you very much for being in touch with the psychology of this experience. Secondly, I'd like to say I spent many years in the elementary schools, and very often when a child acts out in the elementary school, he's somewhere between 7 and 10 years old. They give him a drug called Adrenaline to quiet him down and moderate him. To me, it's the biggest contribution to addiction. And I'd like your opinion about what goes on in the elementary schools in terms of preventing young people from getting into trouble.
Yeah. I'm so grateful that, Ritalin used to be the only response to a kid who had ADHD, and now it seems there are other responses. It also seems that parents are much more involved in determining what's right for their child. I know I had a nephew who was ADHD, and he was given Ritalin, and we just did not like the side effects. It seems like it dampened his personality, and we just decided we would deal with it in other ways. But it's an individual choice by a parent how, the health care of a child. The schools could do better in Los Angeles, in my opinion, in a lot of matters. But I just ran for DA. And I say that because that's going to be somebody else's job to do. What I will do is tell you, though, that we are, as part of our diversion program, we are looking at the 16, 17, 18-year-olds, because they, too, some of them in the criminal justice system or in the juvenile system, suffer from mental illness. That's right around the age where you might see the first bout of serious mental illness. And we are going to be applying for a grant with the state to set up some diversion programs specifically for juveniles who are in the juvenile justice system to see if we can get them some help. But I do not run the schools, and so that's certainly a tougher problem.
My question is there any law or laws to these facilities of you trying to visit somebody and having other patients that are there being disruptive in trying to see somebody?
There probably are, but it's not germane to my practice of law, which is criminal justice. So I just want to
thank you.
Posed to see if we can mandate it statewide, so we're working on a legislative fix. But we're going to take the lead in facilitating getting as many officers trained as possible. The Kelly Thomas case that was mentioned before, if you ever look at that videotape, they're absolutely approaching this obviously mentally ill man with the wrong voice and the wrong tone, and not having enough patience. If they backed out a little bit and allowed someone with more training to come in, Mr. Thomas may very well be alive today. And that's the whole point of this. Can we end up with more of us alive at the end of the day by doing this? So thank you very, very much.